Hello and welcome to the Life in Recovery podcast, episode 83 with me, John Loxley. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're doing a little bit better than me, as I have got COVID and feeling a little bit rough, especially a couple of days ago. I was certainly suffering the symptoms, but now feeling much better. So hopefully it isn't going to get any worse, and I'm over the worst of it now and on the mend. But yeah, I talk about it a bit in the podcast, so I won't go into too much detail now. And this episode of the podcast is with an old friend of mine, Chris Warburton, who is somebody that I met nearly probably 8 or 9 years ago now. In London when I was quite newly sober, and we've always stayed in touch. We've always been good friends. We haven't actually spoke to each other for years now, but that's the mark of a true friendship, isn't it? You don't see each other or speak to each other for a long time, and you just take up where you left off. And I hope you'll agree. It was a fantastic podcast, really great story. We talk a lot about anxiety and self-esteem issues and how to overcome those. And hope you enjoy listening to Chris and I as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. And just before we jump into the podcast, please remember that you can support us financially by visiting www.patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. Any contribution that you can make would be greatly appreciated. So without further ado, I give you Chris Warburton.
My name is Chris, and I am, I'm going to talk about my recovery, I suppose. I'm going to talk about my recovery from alcoholism, my ongoing recovery from alcoholism, I suppose. I'm also going to talk about other stuff as well, I think, because there's a few other bits. When I think of recovery, I think of a few different ideas, I suppose, a few different things that have constituted recovery, I suppose more than, just alcohol. There's quite a lot of other stuff, I suppose. But yeah, starting right at the start, I was born in Hertford, in Hertfordshire. And I was born so I'm the oldest child. So I've got two younger sisters, but I was the oldest child. Well, I am the oldest child. And I wasn't a planned pregnancy. I was an unplanned pregnancy. And my mum and dad weren't expecting me. I feel like, I don't know, it's not the kind of conversation I've had with my parents, but I feel like maybe in some ways they weren't prepared. That's the general sense I get. I guess if something's unplanned and you're not expecting it, and you're in your 20s and it happens, I mean, yeah, maybe you're not prepared. I mean, I'm in my 30s now, thinking about what I was like in my 20s. If I had an unexpected pregnancy, yeah, that would be pretty tough to deal with. So I think there's an element of that maybe played a part in some of my early life and my early years. But I think my parents were, I always felt loved as a kid. I really did. But I think I feel like I grew up in a house that was at times a little dramatic. Like my parents would argue quite a lot. They would drink a lot. I don't think either of my parents have problems with alcohol as such, but they do. Well, they did. They don't really so much now. They've changed and mellowed quite a lot. But I think they did drink quite a lot, and they did argue. Probably not all that much, but in my head, I really remember those arguments, and I really felt insecure at those times. I remember telling my mum I thought they were going to split up when they argued, and that idea of not being quite secure and not feeling quite comfortable or secure is something that's played out in various areas of my early life, I think. And so I felt loved, but I felt like things were a little unstable at times. And my school as well, my primary school, has a massive role in, probably the biggest role in when I look at my mental health stuff, becoming an alcoholic as well, having a problem with alcohol. I think my primary school, so I went to a primary school that was a very, this was the 90s, but it was a kind of place where you can't really imagine the, the way the teachers were was very draconian. So there was a lot of shaming, there was a lot of shouting, there was a lot of shouting, criticizing, ultimately resulting in shaming, I suppose, that went on. I remember one time, like just to give you a couple of stories, like this didn't happen to me, but I think just witnessing it, like I remember there was one kid who just wouldn't do what they wanted him to do, for example. So they tied him to a chair. Like, this is the head teacher and the deputy. So they're tying this kid to a chair. He's like 9 years old, probably. And they put him in front of the class so everyone else could see him. And it was like an example. But this sounds like something you'd see in like the 60s or something. But this was the 90s. It was in a grant-maintained school that wasn't accountable to the council, so they could get away with a lot of things. That's changed now. We can't really do that, but in the 90s you could. So so I remember that. I remember this kid being tied up to this chair. I remember things like going on school trips, and we all jumped in there. We went on a school trip. We're in Northumberland, actually, and we went on a school trip. We all jumped in the sea, and it was just like, as a punishment for jumping in the sea, the headmaster didn't let anyone change their clothes. So we're walking around, we're like 10 years old, and we're walking around in soaking wet clothes in the freezing cold in the northeast of England for the whole day. I mean, it's just like this. And this guy, so this head teacher, when I left that school, he stayed there for a few more years, and then he went to teach at a school in Norwich, and then he went to prison because he assaulted one of the kids at his new school or something like that. I don't know the full details of that story, but that's apparently what happened.
Wow.
And I think that really had a massive impact on me. So that the shame. So I felt like I couldn't do anything right. So every time at that school, every time I did anything, it was wrong. So and what you learn when you're a kid is, when you're learning to what the world around you is, and you're exploring and you're trying things out and you're acting on intuition. If you're constantly told, no, that's wrong, don't do that, and you're criticized all the time, that intuition and that natural urge to explore and to try new things just kind of dies, because you just go into yourself, because you think, well, every time I do something, I'm criticized. So I'm just going to stay in my box here, and I'm just going to, not do anything that's going to antagonize anyone or wind anyone up. So it made me very withdrawn, I think. Quite withdrawn. I suppose sometimes I would still push the boundaries and get in trouble at school and stuff, but there was definitely kind of fear of being yourself, of acting in your, just being yourself and acting in your own way, because there was a fear of the consequences if you were to do that, and that, and I think when you're a kid, you don't know any better. You can't look at that objectively and say, oh, these are some adults who have some real issues with control and power, and they're the ones who really need help. You can't do that when you're like 8. When you're a kid, you look at an adult and they're like a king or something. They're an adult, so they're right. Everything they do, you just interpret as being right because they're older and they're wiser, etc., etc. But so so I took on board everything that was dished out, I suppose, and it resulted in a lot of shame and a lot of anxiety and a lot of wanting to just kind of stay within myself. And I think that, coupled with how things were at home, as I say, it was a loving household, but I felt like it was hard at times. Not that often, but sometimes. And I feel those two things together made me quite an anxious child, really, quite an anxious person. And it made me very, very, very wary, I suppose, of being myself and showing my own character. And as I got older, when I went to secondary school, it was very different. My secondary school was very different. It was just like a normal school with normal people, normal teachers, and that was fine. But I think a lot of damage had been done already. A lot of messages that I'd got about or the way I'd interpreted them from school, at least, was that not being good enough, and that really contributed to low self-esteem, I think, and anxiety as well. Like massive anxiety. I remember so I found it quite hard to make friends. I did make friends as soon as I found alcohol, but I I'll get to that bit. That was a bit of a game changer. But yeah, I found it quite hard initially to make friends. I remember talking of anxiety and the way that kind of manifested it. So I remember when I was about 12, there was a really, and I don't fully understand this now. So I had this thing, like between every lesson at school, I had to go to the water fountain and drink loads of water, because I got really anxious about if I was going to be thirsty during a lesson. I know it sounds really weird, but I was really anxious about that. I was thinking, there's a lesson to go here. I've got to have a drink because otherwise I might be thirsty. And this kind of escalated. So I would do that between every single lesson. And I think as I got more and more anxious about it, I used to drink more and more water between classes, between our different classes at school. And one day I drank so much water that I just passed out and I had to go to hospital. And it was simply because I was anxious about something happening, about this fear of being stuck in a room where I might be thirsty. It was a really weird way of anxiety manifesting itself, but yeah, that's what happened. That's the way it manifested. And I went to hospital with this issue that the doctors basically said to me, I drank too much water and it affected my brain in some way. And there was no lasting damage, but that was a very, very strange thing. I think I've asked my mum about that. She can't really shed any more light on it than that. And I remember the kids at school asking me about that, and I couldn't really explain to them. I mean, how do you explain to someone that you drank too much water? It's like a really bizarre thing. So I remember things like that happening and just generally feeling really anxious and uncomfortable. But yeah, I mean, academically I was fine, actually. Academically I was always okay, but it was very much the kind of social side of it that was a problem. But then probably when I was 15, I started drinking alcohol, and I started doing that because really everyone was doing it. But I still remember, and I know lots of people say this. I know lots of people in recovery from alcoholism say this, but I think it really, really is a thing for me that when I first drank alcohol, it was it was a really massive thing. I remember it so clearly. I remember what we were drinking. I think we were drinking white lightning. It was definitely white cider anyway. And it was in a massive bowl, like it was 3 liters. And it was probably cost about £2. And it was in a park, obviously. It was the usual kind of place for it to be. And I remember how I felt because we were at this party. Well, there was like a party going on and we were drinking outside. And it just, and I remember feeling this kind of feeling of, I suppose it's kind of call it euphoria, but either way, all the anxiety, all the self-esteem issues, all the kind of sense of being slightly less than other people, them all being up here and me being down here. I drunk and suddenly we were level. Suddenly I was on a level with everyone else. Suddenly I could talk to people and I could make people laugh and I could do all the things that I hadn't previously been able to do. I mean, really, it's false, isn't it? I mean, really, it was in me to do those things, but I really believed with my anxious self that I couldn't do those things. So it gave me an incredible amount of confidence, and that was really, I suppose, how I made friends really at school. Because the more we went out, the more I could talk to people, and the more friends I made, and that's really how I got through that period of my life. And it became it became essentially a coping mechanism, I suppose, for any time in my life that I was struggling, any time that anything was difficult. I knew that this would take the pain away, temporarily at least. And I remember going to college to do my A levels as well, and that was when it started to get a bit more serious at that point, perhaps. So I remember, like, I went to college. My college was like a bus ride away, and I remember sometimes I'd do the lessons at college in the morning, and then I'd get the bus back home, which was like a 10-minute bus ride, and I'd get some alcohol from the garage at my mum and dad's house, and I'd get pretty drunk at lunchtime, and then I get the bus back to college and go to the afternoon sessions in college pretty drunk. But this was for two reasons. One, just generally because I think I was pretty much addicted to alcohol by that point. But there was this girl I really liked, and I had a sense that, you know, if I was drunk in the afternoon lessons, I can really impress this girl, which you know, inevitably didn't work. But I think that's a really important point, because I think basically by that point, the sense of, you know, any sense of me not, I basically didn't think I was good enough on my own. So I didn't think I was good enough without alcohol. There was nothing in me that thought I could impress her without alcohol. There was nothing in me that thought I was good enough in any way. Without that, I just constantly thought that I needed something else. Like I think that idea that I'd got from primary school had stayed in my head essentially. I'd internalized that, and I had this real sense of, just as me, without any addition, I'm probably not good enough. So I'm probably not. I'm probably going to need something extra, and that was the way it went for a long time. I mean, I went to university after that, and I didn't last in university. I dropped out. I dropped out because of my alcoholism, really, because it got out of control. Because it got to the point where I mean, I had a student loan. I had, you know, when you're at uni, no one checks if you're going to the classes or not. You know, I wasn't living with my parents either. I was living away from home. I was living in a city far. I was living in Cambridge, actually. I didn't go to Cambridge University. I went to Anglia Ruskin, also in Cambridge. It's so the second university of Cambridge. And I could do what I wanted. So the kind of alcoholism just really took hold there. I guess the things holding it back were things like living with my parents and having some education or a job to kind of go to. I didn't really have that. I didn't have anyone controlling me. I could do whatever I want. But I didn't do whatever I wanted, really, did I? I did whatever the alcohol wanted me to do, basically. I kind of lost all sense of power and control at that point, I think. And it was really isolating as well. I was really, really lonely there. So I didn't really go to any classes, and I was quite ashamed of that. And I didn't tell my family I wasn't going to any classes. I didn't even tell the people I was living with in the halls that I wasn't going to any classes either. So I'd be up until like 5 a.m. drinking whatever I could get my hands on. And I wasn't dependent at that point, but I got enough withdrawal symptoms to make it really uncomfortable to go out, actually. So the idea of going to university and going to any classes became incredibly scary. And just the whole thing was done in secrecy. It was very difficult to meet new friends at uni because I didn't really go to any classes. I got on with people quite well in halls, but generally the loneliness of it and the secrecy and the shame of just having, if I'm failing, I'm not doing what I'm here for, and not really understanding as well why I couldn't stop drinking as well, and having absolutely no sense of why that would be. And I guess I don't come from a family that has any alcoholics in it or any drug addicts, so I had no understanding of of how powerful these things can be and the kind of hold they can have over you. So in my head, it was just another thing that I'd failed at, I suppose. Because I wasn't able to control this. I wasn't able to control drinking, but despite that, I could see everyone around me, even at uni, being able to control drinking. And that was really tough. That was really, really hard. And I ultimately left university, and I went back to live with my mum and dad. And then I went to see a therapist, and I don't know how I even managed this, but I kind of hid from him the fact that I was drinking. I think I was drunk in about half the therapy sessions, and still I managed to hide from him the fact that I even had an alcohol problem. But he diagnosed me with ADHD, which is just not correct. He also happened to specialize in ADHD, and that just so happened to be the thing that I had, which is very convenient as well. I don't have ADHD. I don't have ADHD, as simple as that. If I did honest with him though about alcoholism, that would have given him more of a chance of helping me.
You're very kind there.
I know. He was. I really didn't like him as well. Yeah, I'm trying to be nice, but yeah, it was at the Priory as well, so it wasn't exactly cheap, you know. This is like that was another bit of shame as well, because my parents were paying for me to go to these Priory appointments, and they're not particularly cheap, obviously. And I don't know. I saw this guy for a few months. I was diagnosed with depression somewhere along the line as well. I can't even remember where. It could feasibly be more or less any of these points. I can't even remember where it was, but somewhere I got diagnosed with depression as well. And I was on medication for that. But when you drink and you're on citalopram, it actually really has no effect whatsoever anyway. So that was taking that medication was largely irrelevant. And when you're drinking it that was the cause of a lot of depression anyway, to be honest. So it was kind of irrelevant taking the medication. And I suppose like by this point I'm about 21 or something, and I'm like, and I got a few different jobs. So I'm living with my mum and dad. I had 3 different jobs at this point over about a year and a half period or something, like a 2-year period, and I got sacked from all 3 of them. And one of them was in a pub, which was, I don't really know whether I did that as a conscious decision or not, but yeah, one of them was in a pub, and I essentially got sacked for drinking more than I was probably selling. So they got rid. And one was in a garden centre, and I got sacked from that one for the same reason, because I remember the woman coming up to me, and she said, every time you serve people on the till, you have to cover one of your eyes. I think you've got like double vision. I was, you know, I at this point I'm thinking, man, this is really obvious, isn't it? Like, yeah. So I ended up getting sacked from there, and I had another job. I had a job in the city actually, and I got sacked from that too. Well, I think I got sacked. I kind of got sacked from that, but yeah. But this is kind of all these things are kind of adding up, and these kind of, it just feels like there's a trail of destruction in everything I do, and my sense of who I am, and it's just kind of non-existent. But other than me not having very high self-esteem, and kind of thinking like everything I do seems to just fall apart. And I mean, I ended up in, I was a dependent alcoholic by this point as well. So that's the dependent in that I had to be under the influence at all times. If I wasn't under the influence, I'd go into withdrawal. It's really hard to work full time when you're a dependent alcoholic. It really can't be done practically. People are going to notice, obviously. And so ultimately that was probably why I got sacked. But yeah, when you're a dependent alcoholic, you know, all you really are interested in is alcohol and preventing those withdrawal symptoms. Even the idea of getting drunk is kind of hard, actually, in a way, because your tolerance is so incredibly high that it's actually quite hard to get to that point. You always look really drunk, though. So everyone always thinks you're a lot more drunk than you are. I always used to quite. But yeah, and I ended up, one of these times I went into, because sometimes, you know, sometimes I just couldn't get alcohol for one reason or another. So I'd go into withdrawal, and I'd go into hospital because I got into withdrawal, and I suppose I'd be detoxed there. I remember ending up on a psychiatric ward at one point where I met my future girlfriend. I met her in that psychiatric ward, and probably had a relationship with her for about a year. And that was extremely messy, as you can probably imagine. She also had schizophrenia, and I think one of her friends was a crack dealer, and he ended up a friend of a friend, and he ended up assaulting me as well. I ended up getting beaten up by him, and he went to prison for that. And there's all kinds of messy horribleness there going on there. But that was a really, really turbulent period. I mean, at this point, we're talking like, where are we talking here? Like probably about a year. Well, in the very close period for me actually stopping drinking, because it was getting to the point where it was ridiculous. So I feel, so by this point I was about 25. Yeah, I probably just turned 25 or 24. And my mum and dad had pretty much had enough of me by this point. So I No, but I think I went into detox basically, but I think they kind of arranged for that to happen, and I ended up there. Um, I was in such a bad way actually. I couldn't even go straight to detox. I think I had to go to the hospital for a while first, and then I went into a detox in Beckenham, in Kent, and or South London, wherever that is. Um, and and when I was in detox, that was when I was 25, and that was actually the first time in my life where I really started to, I wouldn't say I'd appreciate being sober, but I got little glimpses of actually maybe there's something in this. Maybe this life isn't. Maybe being sober is something that could be possible. I was there for about 4 weeks, I think, in that detox unit. It seemed like a really long time, and there was also the time where I realized that I'd really damaged my eyesight. And this is something that a problem I still have today. So when I was drinking in those later years, I kind of presumed that the reason I couldn't see properly was because I was drunk. And I had it in my head that if I get sober, my eyes would just, I'll be able to see again. But then when I was in detox, I got sober and I still couldn't see properly. And then, I started to worry, thinking, what have I done to my eye? They did a few tests when I was in there, and they or maybe it wasn't until slightly later that I got diagnosed with optic atrophy, which is some kind of retina damage, and it's irreparable actually, or at least it was then, and I think we're almost getting to the point where it might not be now, but yeah, so it's permanent retina damage, and so everything I see is a little bit blurry. I can still see, but like I wasn't allowed from that point onwards. I wasn't allowed to drive, for instance. I hadn't driven since I was about 19 when I got banned for 3.5 years. But that's another bit. But yeah, but yeah, it was a big deal dealing with that and realizing that I couldn't see very well at all. And not and like for instance now, like if when I'm at work now, I use a normal computer, but often I have to sit quite close to it, or I have to really make the font on the screen quite big. So yeah, there are lots of things that I can't really do because of my eyes, and that I struggle with, and it's really a permanent thing, and it's something I have to deal with and I have to accept. But it was hard. It was hard getting sober for the first time. I was sober for the first time in years and years, and I'm having to deal with this eyesight issue as well, and nothing to take the edge off it. Obviously, no alcohol to take the edge off. But somehow, look, there must have been something that I saw that was good in it, because I ended up going to rehab after that detox. I was probably doing that mainly for other people, to be honest, but at that stage at least. But I did go to rehab in Chalk Farm in North London, and I went there, and that was a 6-month rehab program, and that was brilliant. It was brilliant, and it was one of the most important times of my life, and I felt a real acceptance there. And I can't remember a single thing they told us in that rehab. I can't remember, and it doesn't even matter though, because it really, really doesn't matter, because they were just there and they just accepted me for who I was. And it was like they didn't even really care like who I was or what I'd done. It was just that feeling of, you are actually good enough just as you are, and that's fine. It was that underlying sense of acceptance that it was incredibly important, which is exactly what I needed actually. So the kind of the classes or lessons or whatever they were in rehab, they didn't really even matter. They just wasn't the point. And from then it was from then I started to realize, with that sense of acceptance from others, I started to perhaps accept myself a little bit and realize that maybe I was okay and maybe I wasn't that bad, and some self-esteem started to come back, and after a while I realized that actually maybe it's possible to be sober, maybe it's possible for me to live sober. And I got and admittedly, when I left rehab, I did actually relapse like 3 times, but it was over about a year period. And after that year was up, I started to go to AA. They'd always told us about AA in rehab, but I didn't really go because I was scared of it, because I just thought it's hard enough to meet people as it is without me having to do it when I'm sober. So I don't really fancy doing that. Thanks. So I just didn't really do it. But after a year and coming out and relapsing a few times, I thought I should give it a go. So I went to Alcoholics Anonymous, which was incredibly. Actually, I got that same sense of acceptance that I got in rehab. Actually, came through then, I think. So there was a sense of just being able to be me, and just, but not actually, maybe not just that, being able to be me, but also feeling like, there were other people. There were lots of other people who experienced similar things to me, which I'd never found before. I suppose, well, before rehab anyway, I hadn't found that. So that was incredibly important. And I remember I used to go to the young people's meetings quite a lot as well, which was really nice. Really, really nice, because it was good to meet people the same age who had been through similar things, and to realize that, I wasn't alone in this was a massive, massive thing, huge thing. And it gave me, I think, making friends there was really, really important as well, because that made me realize that, because I think I always had it in me, like I said earlier, I had this thought in me that to really be likable, to be good enough, I had to kind of add something, and that something was always alcohol. And I had to just act like an idiot when I was drunk and make people laugh. And that's what I had to do to make people like me, or for people to like me. But going to those AA meetings, particularly the young people's one, and meeting people there and making friends with them, that was amazing. That was revolutionary. It was like, okay, I can meet people, and they actually seem to quite like me when I'm sober. And that was, just an incredible thing. Yeah, like an amazing thing.
Like me. That's where you met me.
I wasn't sure whether to mention you or not. Yeah, of course. Yeah. And that's what we met.
When we were young people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I should explain that. Yeah. Yeah. Should explain that we don't go to those meetings anymore.
We're not young people anymore. Yeah, that was probably like 9 years ago. I
mean, I've been sober coming up like 10, almost 11. So yeah, it would have been like around then.
Same as me. I mean, my sobriety date's August the 5th, 2010. So yeah, I mean, it's like I've just done 10 years, coming up to 11. But I think we met each other probably in our maybe second year, maybe, I think.
That sounds about right. Yeah, that does sound about right. And it was, I think it was at that meeting as well. It was at that. It was at that.
Yeah. Because it was because there was a couple of our who then became our kind of friends and like close kind of friend unit. I think it was one of those people had recommended it to me, and then I went there, and you were already a regular. So and then I shared, and then when you were like, oh yeah, because is it your dad that's from Manchester?
Yeah.
Yeah, because you like came up to me at the end of the meeting and you were like, "Oh, you from Manchester?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then he goes, "Oh, my dad's from Manchester." And then you were like, "Are you a red or a blue?" And that was like how we got talking. And then then I just became a regular to the meeting as well. And it was and funnily, like, it's interesting because I'll talk more in a minute about like your insecurities and stuff and your anxiety and all that. But it's interesting, isn't it, that when you first meet somebody who, like, I didn't know. I've heard bits and bats of your story, but I've never heard it in this depth. So, I wasn't aware of all the stuff that happened to you at school and in your early school life. But when I met you, I would never have thought that you were that type of person. Like I just took you on face value. So straight away, like I just got on with you straight away, and I never thought, oh, Chris is really anxious and Chris is like, got low self-esteem. I always thought I was quite a confident person, but at that point, you'd already been in recovery for a couple of years, so it had already started to work and you'd already started to change, which is interesting, isn't it?
It is. It's real. Yeah, it definitely has started to change by that point. And do you think if you'd have said, when I asked you that question, do you think if you said blue, do you think we'd have still been friends?
No. You'd have you'd have been like, see you then. But yeah, so your recovery kind of really took off at those young persons meetings.
It really took off there, yeah. And then I guess from there it kind of goes to it. From there, I started to feel a bit increasingly confident about myself, and as you said, like the way I was when I met you, for example. And I think through there, I started to actually started to work in journalism for a while. So I was quite interested in journalism, and I was doing that as like a trainee for a while. And then after a while, from going to AA and helping people and being involved in that world, I realised that actually, it was something I really liked, and that was what made me go to work for an organisation. Well, be it volunteer at first, actually, for an organisation, which is now called Forward Trust, which helps people in prisons and in the community with alcohol and drug abuse. And that's what made me want to do that. And from being a volunteer, I then became an apprentice, and then I started working at a prison. I don't know. Do I want to stay with it? It's the prison. It's the prison that we both worked in anyway.
You can. I think you can say the name if you want to say the name. It was where was it we worked at? Was it Wormwood Scrubs?
It was Wormwood Scrubs, yeah. And then I think, didn't you go to Wandsworth after that?
I went to Wandsworth, yeah. I was actually just trying to remember then what the timeline was, but yeah, it was Wormwood Scrubs we worked together, wasn't it? And then I moved. So do you still work for the Forward Trust, or you don't work for them now?
So I went to Pentonville after that. So I went to Pentonville Prison after that to work for Care UK. So at that point, because while this is going along, I was doing my counselling courses and becoming a counsellor, so I decided that's what I wanted to do in life. So I became a counsellor, and as soon as I was qualified, more or less, well, pretty much, I was looking for another job. And then I went to work for the mental health team in Pentonville with Care UK. And then I don't do that anymore. And then in May last year, I got a job at a place called Survivors UK, which is a really, really cool place. And it helps. And we do counselling for men or anyone who identifies as a man. And we counsel men who have been raped or sexually abused, usually as children. So we can do quite long-term counselling as well. So all my clients now, really, well, for survivors anyway, are all men who have been sexually abused and are suffering the effects of that. And that's incredibly rewarding work, and that's really, really great work. But it's only, I do it part-time because I think it'd be quite intense to do that full-time. So I do that part-time, and in August I set up my own counselling business, which I think I've got like 5 clients at the moment. So that's kind of taking off a little bit. So I've got a private practice and I'm doing the survivor stuff, and it's great. Obviously it's all online because of how we are. I mean, but yeah, it's really good actually. So that's all going pretty well. Yeah.
It's pretty amazing, really, isn't it? Considering that where you've come from to where you are today. I mean, it takes a massive level of self-esteem to be able to set up your own business and to be able to counsel other people. So it just goes to show, doesn't it, what a transformation. And for anybody that's listening to this that's got anxiety or that's got low self-esteem issues, what happened? Like, what changed? So you start going to these AA meetings. You get in there with the young people's meetings. You're meeting more people that are around your kind of age group. They're accepting of you as who you are, which is wonderful. But what work did you do exactly that changed that thing in you that was the anxious person, and how did it work, and what do you still do today to maintain that?
So that was done through doing the 12 steps in AA, and that was done through, and that's done through getting a sponsor, through finding a sponsor at a meeting who's a more experienced person in AA who can guide you through those steps. That sponsor I had, by the way, is still the one I have now. So I've actually only ever had one sponsor. which is pretty cool. So it's always been the same person, and so he's kind of been on that whole journey, which is lovely. And I think, you know, there were lots of things that helped me in AA, and I suppose being able to essentially, if I'm going to pick out what's really, really been important, I think one of them is, you know what I think one of the most important things that I did actually was making amends. And I think the kind of humility and that was needed for that, and making amends was a really, really big thing for me. Actually. I had a massive list of on step 9 and step 8, a massive list of people to make amends to, and I think going through that and being able to at least try and put some of those things that I'd done wrong, in quotes, right, was really, really beneficial to me. And I think that took away a lot of guilt I felt actually around the way I treated people and the way I'd been in relation to people. But I think like taking inventory as well, like taking inventory in step 4, but then doing that in an ongoing way in step 10 as well. So being really aware of how I am, being aware of when I've acted in an appropriate way, or I've done something I shouldn't really have done. And again, back to humility, having the humility when I recognize those things to try and put them right, and to go to that person and try and live in a way that, you know, that I'd try and treat people in the way that I want to be treated, essentially. And that's an ongoing process. And I think, yeah, and I think as well, just passing that on to step 12 as well, the idea of passing it on to other people and being there to support other people in the same way that people have been for me, I think is really important. But I think, honestly, around the anxiety and the self-esteem, I think there's just all the things I've talked about in terms of have all contributed to it in different ways. They really have. And that gets tested sometimes, by the way. So like my wife is pregnant now, like we're having our first baby, but that has been really, really hard. And the reason that's been hard is because when we were trying to have a baby, it wasn't working. So we went to see a doctor about it. And it turns out that when they did some tests on my tests on my semen, a semen analysis, there's no semen in my sperm. Get this right around. There's no sperm in my semen. So when they're analysing the semen, they're not actually finding any sperm in there at all. And that was really, you know, talking about self-esteem, you know, that really hit me, and it really affected my, you know, my chances of having children with my wife. And what happened there is ultimately we had to do a sperm extraction operation. So they basically go into your balls and they look around to see if there's any semen in there, and if there are, then they extract them and they freeze them. And they told me before the operation there's only a 50% chance that they would find any semen at all, any sperm at all. And even if they do, you then have to use IVF to try and make it work, and the sperm has to be of a good enough quality. So there's a lot of ifs and buts in there, and amazingly it's worked. And my wife, as I say, is pregnant, and that's incredible. But you know, going through that. Talking about like self-esteem and anxiety and how it's been tested, that was an incredible thing to go through. That was one of the toughest things I've been through. I wouldn't have been able to do that either without the support of people I've met in AA and the support of really caring people I've met along the way. There's no way I'd be able to get through something like that.
Do you know, like when you hear the kind of, you know, I suppose cliches in a way, that the antidote to fear and anxiety is faith, is that something that you subscribe to? Like, is your faith in either a higher power or the program or other people or whatever, has that helped you to overcome it? Or has it just been purely the support of people?
I know. I thought you were getting at that when you asked the last question. Yeah, I was being a bit avoidant of that. Sorry.
I wasn't trying to direct you. It's just that because of the way you've just answered, I'm interested to hear how you can, because obviously that sounds like a really stressful situation, and I'm interested to hear what tools you use to get past that.
It's a really interesting one. I suppose ultimately, really, what I've used mainly is I'm in therapy as well, by the way. And the reason I'm in therapy is because I find AA is really helpful in many ways. But in some ways, like exploring, the real impacts, for instance, of that stuff that happened in my primary school, I feel like I really need therapy for that. So that's been one of the ways. Going to therapy has been one of the ways. And I got through something like that. And it's really using, I think it's really using people around me in terms of faith. It's a really interesting point, because I realise that it's such an integral part of the AA program. But I don't know. I don't. In terms of faith and higher powers, I realise that I have very, very limited control. There are far, far greater powers than me in the world. All I can control is my little bit, what I do and what I say and how I act. Everything else is beyond me. Everything else, in terms of what you do, John, in terms of what everyone does, in terms of how the world is absolutely beyond me. And that's something that has been incredibly important in life, actually. That is true. That in terms of that's been very important in terms of being able to, in terms of acceptance, and in terms of not trying to control outcomes and control people and control how things are. That has been really important. But faith in terms of higher powers, I don't really know. My higher power that I've always used for AA is not very well defined. It's just a general acceptance that maybe it's nature, maybe it's not really particularly well defined. I think it's just the idea that there's lots of things I can't control that are not up to me, that I'm not going to try and control. So I think it's more. Do you know what? I think with me, and this may not be, I'm not perfect. I'm not suggesting I do these things necessarily in all the right ways, but I think with me, there's a lot of acceptance of how things are and how things will turn out, more than there is faith that they will turn out really well, or faith that there's more acceptance they will turn out the way they're meant to be in some way.
Yeah. Well, I think that, really, when I was listening to you then, that is exactly my view as well. Like, when somebody says the word God, I don't think of this, this entity separate from the universe. I just think of the universe as a whole as being, you can call it the universe, you can call it God, you can call it whatever you want, and everything that's happening is just happening. Like the good, the bad, the ugly, the miraculous. Like everything's happening, all going on at once, and whatever will be, and like you just said there, I think that's the only way to be able to deal with that, because not everything's going to go your way, is acceptance, and I suppose the faith element is exactly what my faith is the faith that I'm okay with what is, like you just said then. I'm okay. I have faith that what is exactly what is meant to be. So therefore, if something happens and it's a bit shit, like I've got COVID now, like I didn't necessarily want to get COVID, but at the same time, I'm quite like I'm comfortable with the fact that I don't think it's gonna kill me. I think I'm gonna be all right. Like I think I'm over the worst of it. But if it was really bad, then that would be what's meant to be. Like there's no point in fighting what's going on, is there? Like you might as well just accept it and do the best you can with it. And that's my experience of life in general, really. So yeah, I totally relate to what you just said.
I really like that. I like what you said. I think you said being okay with what is. I think that just sums up pretty much everything we've both said. Yeah. I absolutely.
Well, and that mitigates anxiety, doesn't it? Because anxiety comes as a result of you wanting the future to be different. Like basically, you're thinking about this future that's going to be the way you want it to be. So, like as an example with the COVID, if I was constantly thinking about, right, it'll be okay in 3 or 4 days when COVID's gone, like, and that it's not all right now, I don't feel very well, that would create anxiety in me because I'm not living in the present. I'm just constantly thinking about this future where things are going to be better. And similarly for depression, it's like remembering, the good old days back when, I was 15, 16 before my alcoholism kicked off, and harking back to those days and wanting life to be like that, well, that creates depression, and a resentment and an anger for the way that things are right now. And actually, like, when you really, when you really kind of look at it in the kind of with the light of acceptance and awareness, when you just sit down in the moment, in the present moment, and just say, do you know what, everything's all right. So it's okay. Like, the shit going on in the world that I don't agree with, there's loads of mad stuff going on at the moment, but actually, I'm okay. Things are all right. That's my experience,
No, I agree, and I think that what you said about anxiety, it just feels like it's a form of wanting to control stuff. Like, the anxiety is coming because you want to control the future, you want to know what's happening, and we don't know, as you say. And I get what you're saying about being in the present as well, because what has passed is ultimately passed, and we can't change it, and we can't control the future, as we've been saying. So being in that present moment, actually, maybe I should have said this earlier, but I find that mindfulness was something, the form of meditation, mindfulness is something that has really benefited me for that reason. Just being in the moment, and being accepting of this is all that we really have. This is all that's real, because the future hasn't happened yet. That isn't real. The past has already gone. This is the only real bit we have. That's been really helpful. But I think it's really important to point out that it's quite hard to do as well. Just trying to stay in the present can be a real challenge, but it's definitely something that is helpful. So you keep having to bring yourself back, and as humans, our minds naturally drift off. But yeah, it is certainly something to aim for that can really help.
That's where the 12-step program is quite amazing, really, because you get taught to keep it in the day, don't you? It's a day at a time, and like in your early days, you get people will say to just minute at a time, hour at a time, day at a time, and it becomes this mantra, and that's like now. So 10 years like down the line, on any given day, I'm only thinking about the 24 hours ahead. I'm not thinking about what's going on next week, or what's going on tomorrow, or what's going on whenever. Don't get me wrong, I'll make plans for future things, but I don't think about those things in that day. I just think about what I need to do in the day. And it's like, I was saying this to Adele earlier, I said, when I wake up in the morning, I think to myself, right, what am I doing now within the next hour or so? I'm having my breakfast, I'm doing this, and then once I've done those things, I then start thinking about what I'm doing in the next hour, and the next hour, and the next hour. And that is the reason why I don't have anxiety. I believe that that's why, because I'm not saying that I'm totally present at all times, because obviously I drift off from time to time, but I'm generally thinking about what I'm doing, like, more or less immediately, and it just takes all the worry out of my life, basically.
No, I get what you're saying. I think that what that thing about breaking the day down hour by hour is really, really good as well, because I mean, sometimes, yeah, you're right. The idea in AA of taking things a day at a time is great, but sometimes a day can seem like forever. Sometimes, yeah, you have to break it down into those smaller bits and take it really one step at a time. It sounds like this is something that I aim for. It sounds like you're a little, perhaps got it nailed down a little bit better than I have. I try my best. I really do. I actually find in some ways that I'm finding it a little bit harder at the moment. I don't know about you, but obviously, like, I'm working from home, and there isn't really anyone. I think often it can be easier to keep it in the day keep it in the moment if you've got lots of stimulation going on. Like, if you've got conversation from colleagues, people walking in and out of an office, you're always here. There's always something going on. I'm in my flat all the time now, and I my wife is here and she's working as well. And I find, because obviously I haven't got any colleagues here, there's nothing like that. I find that actually sometimes my mind can drift a little bit more, which is fine. It's something to be aware of. I think it's good to be aware of that. But yeah, I think I'm finding that a little bit, making it. I think that being in one room or being in one flat at least is making things a little harder. Actually. It might be slightly different for you because you've got more people in your home than I have.
Well, I was just going to say, when your baby comes along, that'll all end. As I said before, anyway, congratulations. But yeah, your life is about to change. Believe me. It's amazing because that's one of the benefits of it is that it keeps like when I'm with Alice, I'm totally present, and if I ever zone out or drift off, thinking about something else or pick my phone up or anything like that when I'm with her, I immediately feel guilty straight away because I think to myself, hang on a minute, I'm with my daughter here, do you know what I mean? This is an important time and I need to spend it with her. So the phone will get put down. I'll be back in the present moment and I'm with her. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I've got a baby, I've got 2 stepkids, I've got a dog, I've got my parents, I've got Adele's parents, that are helping with childcare and all the rest of it. So, and plus I'm working from home and I've got loads of hobbies as well. So I feel like I've constantly got a lot of stuff going on. In fact, one of the things that my sponsor says to me regularly is like, when do you ever relax? He said, like, when do you ever just do nothing? And usually for like an hour a night, I'll sit down and chill out and watch Netflix with Adele or whatever, watch a movie or something. But actually just sitting and being on my own, the only time I ever do that at the moment is when I'm meditating in the morning and in the evenings. So that's like at night when everybody else has gone to bed, I have an hour, about an hour to myself where I'll, relax, meditate, do my inventory but yeah, I suppose ultimately in answer to what you were saying before about like where I'm at in terms of like presence and stuff, I think it's just a lot of hard work, like it never ends, does it? Like the spiritual journey is continuous, and the peace that comes with it, the peace of mind that comes with it, is progressive as well, and it's like the more work you put into your program and the more effort you put into it, then the more peace of mind you get. But there's different ways of doing that. Like, you now with the work that you do and both, with your job and with your own business as well, you're helping a lot of people, and that must be really rewarding, like from a self-esteem perspective, because we spoke about anxiety and self-esteem, didn't we? From a self-esteem perspective, that must be really rewarding for you, because I remember when I used to work in the prisons, it was probably more rewarding on a self-esteem level to be helping people face-to-face, day in, day out, than it was doing what I do now, which is managing, I manage the team now, so I'm not really client-facing as much. But doing this as well, this helps with my self-esteem because I know that there's people listening to this and, and they enjoy it and they get something out of it. So that helps with my self-esteem. But I think there's nothing better for self-esteem than working face-to-face with people, both professionally and personally. What do you think?
I think in my experience, and I working in the prisons I've worked in, and doing some of the counselling I've done face to face, and some of the AA conversations that I've had face to face, there's an extra element to that, and I think face to face it adds something that you can't quite. But don't get me wrong, right? I think all the stuff I do on Zoom, like with counselling stuff, is really valuable. It really is. It really helps. But I think that it is missing something slightly. The presence that you feel with someone else. Like talking about AA. When you're, particularly in my early days, I remember going to the AA room and feeling like this kind of presence, this kind of, I don't know, aura, whatever it is. This kind of feeling of, I don't know what it is, but either way, it was a kind of feeling of safety. A feeling of being contained and comfort somehow. I think that you can often feel that in counselling, I think, but with distant stuff like this, it's a little bit harder. And I think that, some of the best work I've done has been face to face. With the survivors stuff for my job and with the private practice, to be honest with you, I've got nothing to compare it to. So I started working for survivors in May last year, and the entire thing has been remote. So I mean, I've never even met my colleagues in person, obviously, which is bizarre. So I've worked there for 9 months. I've only ever seen people in Zoom meetings. So there's nothing really to compare that to. It's very odd. I mean, when I got the job in February, I think, before lockdown, obviously, and then I started in May. So I've got nothing to compare that to. And again, with the private practice, I've really pretty much all of the work I've done has been online. But yeah, there's something that we're maybe missing. Do you know, I was looking into possibly walk and talk therapy as well. That's maybe something that I might look into. The idea of walking, meeting up with someone and walking and being able to do sort of counselling sessions like that. Essentially like going for a walk with someone, but doing a therapy session. I might look into that a little bit more because that could be a possible.
That would be awesome. I think that would be really, really cool, because going for a walk in itself is therapeutic, just going for a walk. But if you was walking with somebody and having a meaningful conversation, it would be hugely therapeutic, I believe. I mean, that's what Adele and I do every single day. We go for 2 walks a day. We walk the dog, and often we just talk about the shit that's going on for us, and by the time we've done a half an hour, 45-minute walk, we feel great. We feel much better. So, 100% think that. And the interesting what you said about the energy, like in the rooms when you go to like 12-step meetings, or when you have counselling. For me, again, that's that higher power element. Like ultimately we are energetic beings, aren't we? Like the whole universe is made out of energy. We're made out of energy. And that energy is visceral, like when you can go into a room and the energy can be terrible and you can feel it and think, I'm not staying here, and you leave. Or you can go into a room and the energy is really high and you just feel, there's been some meetings that I've gone to and I've left the meetings feeling absolutely high as a kite, because of the energy in the room, and it's been amazing. And I don't think it matters whether you're religious, whether you're spiritual, whether you're atheist. It doesn't really make any difference. Everybody that goes to those meetings can say that they felt that. Like everybody would say that they felt something. So, whatever it is, it doesn't matter, does it? All that matters is it has a positive effect on your emotions and your well-being.
Ultimately, that is it. Yeah, and I think everyone experiences that. It doesn't matter really whether you're, as you say, religious or not. There is an energy, a really positive energy that comes from those meetings. And I'm sure, like, I'm thinking of times as well. There is, you can often feel that energy, can't you? I'm thinking of times when I felt really negative energy as well. Not in AA, just in a previous job I had. You can usually sense that when you walk into a room. It's kind of, you usually sense that energy in some way. And that was one thing that I think made it really, actually in the early days of AA, actually made it really welcoming, made it really inviting, because it was a sense of kind of welcoming and positive energy that I hadn't really experienced in that many places before. So it really feels, I think that feels quite, I don't know really what it feels. I think it just feels safe. I think I said that earlier, but I think it just feels safe. With the walk and talk therapy as well, I think that's a really good idea as well. I suppose the only reservation I have of that is, I suppose you'd have to be a bit careful with maybe which clients you chose, because you're doing it in public. So, if someone's going to potentially maybe start crying or become quite emotional, I suppose there's that. But then again, I suppose you could do the therapy depends what you do it, doesn't it? Don't you? I suppose if you did it in a park where there weren't too many people, it might work. But yeah, I think it's worth it.
You'd have to just be careful that there wasn't too many people around as well, because obviously people want a confidential space, don't they, when they're talking? I was just going to, what was I going to say then? Oh yeah, just on the energy thing. I mean, Zoom and Skype and all the other mediums are fantastic. Like what a lifesaver for us during this lockdown. But it's definitely not the same. Like even now, like this conversation that we're having, it's fantastic, and obviously we've not seen each other for years, so it's lovely to see you. But it would be totally different if we were sat in a room with each other. There would be a different vibe, like. And that's unfortunately what's lost, but it's a good substitute. I was the question I always ask of everybody as I come towards the end is, what does life in recovery mean to you?
That's a good question. What does life in recovery mean? I think one of the key things I'll tell you, the first thing that comes to mind is choice. And I think the word choice is really important, because I think when you're in the grips of, I know I've talked mainly about alcoholism, but I'd apply the same thing to depression as well, or anxiety. When these things are really powerful things, and you don't really have much choice. It often feels, at least, like you don't really have much choice. You're often kind of driven by those things, and you can't really, you're a dependent alcoholic. You wake up in the morning, you're not really making a choice. You're going to drink that day because that's what you have to do. The choice is already made for you. In recovery, it's different. In recovery, you can go down multiple roads. There's more than one road. There's more than one avenue to go down, and there's opportunity as well. And I think it means, this is going to sound really cheesy if I say love, but I thought of love. And I think I mean love. I think I mean love from other people and from me to other people as well. I think, love and relationships and meaningful relationships and real care for other people and them caring for me as well. There's been a massive development in the strength of relationships and the kind of and the value I place on relationships I think there's been that too.
It's sharing love, isn't it? That's what you're saying, sharing it rather than abusing it, really, and rather than like taking it from people.
Is that what I'm trying? Yeah. So rather than taking all I can get and using it or manipulating it or just draining it from others and not giving it back, it's more of a presence of love between people. Yeah, maybe it's a shared love. Yeah. It's very different, a very, very different feeling to how that might have been when I wasn't in recovery. But yeah, I think choice is a huge thing. I really do, and the opportunity as well, and the kind of just widening of everything. When I wasn't in recovery, everything is very narrow. Like I kind of very closed in, very solitary as well, very solitary, isolated. It's kind of a widening of my whole world, and I'm part of something. Rather than being isolated on my own. I'm almost stepping into something like something much, much larger and becoming part of that. And I think that as well. So maybe inclusion as well in some way, just feeling part of. And when I say part of, I just mean part of the world.
Beautiful, mate. What piece? If you had to give one piece of advice to anybody that was struggling or thinking about making a change, what would you say?
Are we talking about any kind of problem that you might be struggling with? Just anything, really?
Anything. Somebody who might be struggling with mental health or with addiction or anything.
I suppose the ultimate thing would be that I suppose it would be not to give up hope. And I think that there's always going to be, it would be not to give up, not to be in that place where you've given up and completely given up on yourself. I think there's always an opportunity, and I think there's always going to be something within you that can help you to get out of that, and for that to come out, for that to show itself in you. Because I think essentially we all have the ability within us somewhere to actually solve most of our problems. I know I'm almost opening up another kind of conversation with that, but I think we have this innate ability in ourselves to solve our own problems. I think in counselling, I'm not really solving my problems. I'm enabling my clients to solve their own problems. I think it's within them. And I think that's within all of us. And I think no matter how low or down we feel, it's still within us. And I think, therefore, no one should ever give up on themselves. So I think finding somewhere or some place or something to help bring that out, whether that be accessing support through, whether it be AA, NA, whatever it is, a mental health service, whatever it is, that can help bring that out and stimulate that. But I think it's within all of us. So I don't think, basically, to not give up hope and to not give up on yourself would be it.
Cool, man. Well, it's been lovely catching up with you, and I'm really pleased that you're going to be a dad. And good luck with it, mate. Thanks for listening, and if you've been affected by any of the issues discussed in the podcast, please see a range of mutual aid organisations in the show notes. Also, don't forget that you can support the Life in Recovery podcast by visiting patreon.com/lifeinrecovery. Peace and love, and goodbye for now.